Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first e-dialogues of 2022. I hope everyone's year is off to a great start. I know this will be a fantastic conversation, and I'm really looking forward to jumping in. But first, a few quick notes. I want to thank our sponsors today, Validere and Project Canary, as well as our fantastic speakers that you'll be hearing from in just a minute. At Energy Dialogues, we are a leading network for the North American and global energy sectors and a catalyst for industry connection and partnerships. We do this through hosting open dialogue across the energy value chain, like this one today, and our goal is to inspire global solutions amidst an ongoing energy evolution, as we understand that collaboration and rational debate among all stakeholders is a must on the journey towards the most sustainable energy future we can envision. A few housekeeping. Please feel free to drop your name and company in the chat so everyone can know who's with us today. Also, we'll be taking questions at the end, but also throughout. So if you'd like to ask the panelists something, please type your name and company and then your question. And with that, I'll hand it over to Natalie Gonzalez, partner at Baker Botts.
Thanks so much, Vina. I really appreciate it. So as Vina said, I'm Natalie Gonzalez. I'm an IP partner with Baker Botts based here in Houston, Texas. In addition to working with a number of our clients in the energy industry, I also co-lead our partnerships with emerging company accelerator networks here in Houston. And that includes the ION and the Rise Clean Energy Accelerator. Hopefully some of you have heard of both of these. So through that work, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of companies, both big and small, who are all navigating the move towards a more sustainable energy future. As part of this, I think we can all agree that digitalization is one of the keys to navigating the energy transition. Digital technologies are essential to navigating and facilitating ESG imperatives, improving the reliability of power grids, and generally getting sustainable energy where it needs to be. We've got an incredible slate of panelists today to talk about digital technology and the digital transition and digitalization in general. I'll go ahead and briefly introduce all of them, and then I'm going to start with some questions that will allow them to give you a bit more information about their background. So with us today, we have Kayla Ball, Senior VP of Products at Validere. We've got Will Foyles, Chief Operating Officer of Project Canary. We have Kelly Bott, Senior VP of ESG, Land and Regulatory for Pure West. And last but certainly not least, we have Stephen Conley, CEO and founder of Scientific Aviation. So thank you all for being here today. We're excited about this discussion that we're going to be having today. The first question I'd like to throw out, and I'd like all of you to answer this one, and as part of it, to give us a bit about your background. So first, tell us a bit about your background, your current role at each of your respective companies. And I'd like you to share one thing that 2021 has shown you about the need for digitalization in the energy industry. So, Stephen, let's start with you.
Okay, so I'm an atmospheric scientist. My PhD is actually in atmospheric science, specializing in the atmospheric boundary layer, which is the part of the atmosphere that's really close to the ground. And so I started Scientific Aviation back in 2010. And initially, we just focused on airborne measurements of the atmosphere, but over time, we went down to drones, and then 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, to ground sensors. So in 2021, what has shown me is with this COVID, how important it was to be able to work with people that weren't near me. And so all the efforts we went through to get video cameras on our computers and be able to just make that work in a functional way, like learning how to use all this data in a real world scenario that I had never expected to see.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate that. Will, why don't you go next?
Yeah, Will Foyles, co-founder, CEO of Project Canary. Originally come from more of a quantitative finance background and research. Really quickly discovered when I was in New York, and a lot of investors did, that what was being reported to them by agencies, governments, companies was at best sometimes incomplete, and at worst just totally mischaracterized. So set out to measure things independently, spent some time at Stanford working on a fruit graduate degrees, and then came to start Project Canary to help bring higher fidelity into the emissions space. So super excited to be here today. What 2021 showed me is the need for resiliency. I think prior to the pandemic, many people loved to operate just-in-time supply chains and didn't really want to embrace digitization. And oops, who knew a global pandemic would hit? Those that were really ahead of the curve, working from home, it's not a problem at all. Went down seamlessly. Those that didn't lost market share, lost business, and everything else. And so we'll talk about this more later, but I think we're really at a paradigm shift in a lot of different vectors, and digitization will be a key to staying ahead of the curve.
Yeah, really great points, Will. Thank you. Kelly, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Kelly Bott with Pure West. Been working in oil and gas for a decade or more on environmental issues in the Upper Green River Basin. We navigate everything from air quality issues, water, surface, and groundwater, wildlife, sensitive species, sage grouse, big game, you name it. It's a fun area to work. So the question about what 2021 taught me about digitization is really the need for analytics and processing. You know, sensor availability is becoming broad. The prices are coming down. We're collecting a lot of data streams. Now we have to figure out what to do with it, and it's all about processing and analytics. So that's kind of where I think the discussion needs to go, and I think the digitalization needs to evolve.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. Kayla.
Yep. Hi, Kayla Ball. I'm a geologist by background. I was fortunate enough to get essentially sucked into the technology vortex early on in my career and really had the privilege of sitting alongside some of the brightest minds in the industry, technical professionals working on anything from geosteering wells to optimal well spacing and field development plans to completions design, and really taking all of the physical science expertise and helping make software and essentially get these working professionals home in time for dinner. It's interesting to see the evolution of the industry. I remember when I first started, the concept of VPN and remote logging into your desktop to make some of these decisions was painstakingly tedious. And now you can look around, everyone is connected on their phone. I can take a Zoom call from my car on a drive. I can be at the beach and be doing business. And really what I've noticed and what a lot of people are struggling with after 2021 is the collaborative effort. There's people collaboration, but then there's the need to holistically try to solve some of these problems. And so a lot of people are struggling with, okay, we've got the information in one place. How do we make it more horizontally available across all of our contributing team members? So that's what I'm actively working on. Primarily, I'm working on problems in the midstream and upstream domains right now. But yes, very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Really appreciate all of you being here today. So we've heard from everyone, obviously some very diverse backgrounds and roles that we've got here. And so I encourage the audience to please submit questions along the way. If anything comes up, I will try to interject them into the discussion. If not, we'll handle them at the end. But we welcome questions, and everyone here on the panel would love that interaction from the folks that are watching. So you've heard some talk about collaboration. We've talked about resiliency, data, ESG a bit. And so I'd like to focus on each of those various areas. The first thing I want to talk about is ESG. And so let's talk about how ESG is interacting with digitalization. And as a second part to that sort of broad topic, how does the shift in reporting metrics convene with the digital measurement economy? It's kind of a loaded question there, and I'm going to direct it to Will first.
Yeah, thanks. I guess at the beginning, I kind of want to roll back the clock to set the stage. When I started in New York, it's now a decade ago, people used to laugh at ESG, right? As a joke, we're capitalists, And then really something changed. The surge in capital flows into ESG, right? Funds, everyone was raising a new ESG fund. Suddenly fund managers are like, wow, I can make a lot of money on just building my AUM under ESG. And so all the companies rushed to put out their sustainability reports, raise their hand, say, I'm ESG friendly, everything else. The next shoe to drop is the scrutiny is going to go through the roof as stories start coming out for people who made all these pledges and put forward a good light to say they're ESG, and they're really cutting a lot of corners. And the number one way to get around that is extremely robust and high fidelity data on the back of digitization, right? So if someone wants to say, hey, where did this metric come from? You can say, here's a terabyte and a half of data. Here's all the different models that we've used behind it. And you can put forward a positive lens, right? Also building your self-defensibility, right? Everyone wants to confer themselves a benefit. If I can get a discount on my driver's insurance just by saying I'm a good driver, I will, right? And so the same thing will play out, right? And this is why people are looking for someone to independently tell them really what it is that's going on at the facilities. This is why we have audits and financial services, things like that. So I think the next shoe to drop here is to being able to move quickly to answer questions and do so in a credible way by putting forward lots of very good information.
Thanks, Will. Great response. Kelly, do you want to weigh in on some of the things that Will said?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of these data streams that are coming in really cover us on the environmental front. We've been collecting data on, methane, groundwater, surface water, you name it. We've got these data streams coming in. We've now built quite a historical record in some cases. And I think, so we've got a lot of coverage on the E. I think what Will is talking about is really building the S&G and becoming transparent, becoming defensible with the data. I think that, as again, availability and affordability works in our favor, we've got a real opportunity to tell our story, not just about our current environmental diligence, but, the history of diligence and the improvements that we've made over time. And I agree with Will. I think fidelity and, just the quality of the data is going to become very, very important.
That's great. Thanks, Kelly. Stephen, Kayla, want to chime in on this one?
Sure, I could. So I'm a little bit on the other side. I'm the anti-hoarder in my personal life. And the one thing that I have seen with digitalization is that the biggest challenge that we get caught in is you get so much data that the data becomes useless. And so I know when I first got a digital camera, I would take so many pictures because they were free, but then I wouldn't delete them. And then I couldn't find the ones I wanted. Whereas when I had a film camera, I could always find the picture I wanted because I didn't take 20 of them. And one of the things I think is really important as we look at these digital solutions is actionable data. And we have to sort of resist that scientific temptation to say, all data is good, collect everything we can, and say, what data do we really need to be able to do the job we're trying to do? I'm trying to say there's no leaks at this site. What data do I need to say that and collect nothing more? Because the more data that I collect, the more I've got to sift through, the more I've got to store, and the more burdensome it becomes to make use of it. So that has always been kind of at my forefront of my brain when I'm making these solutions is, how do I get just enough data to do what I'm trying to do without burying the problem?
Yeah, and I would also agree that it's sort of double-sided what we're seeing in the industry right now, because you can't attract capital without transparency around what you're doing with your ESG, but you can use transparency with ESG to attract additional capital. And at the end of the day, the capital is still going to be spent on normal business operations, right? The E portion of the ESG are things that we can control in our day-to-day business process. And so if you can play your cards right and embrace the level of transparency, I know transparency can sometimes be a dirty word for a lot of oil and gas industry professionals. If you can be transparent, you have the ability to really take the investment and get a 2-for-1, improve your business, remodel your business, and really do right by some of the climate challenges we're facing as well.
Yeah, it's a great point, Kayla. I want to go back to the fidelity point that folks have been raising with respect to data. And so there's a question that we were going to throw out. I think now's the right time to throw it out is, in this data-driven era that we're in, the next frontier to some is frequency and fidelity. And I think both of those have been touched on a bit. And so I'd like to expand on those, and I'd like our folks to expand on those. So Kelly, I'm going to point to you. What does that mean to you? This next frontier to some is frequency and fidelity. Where do you see this going in the future? Did we lose you, Kelly?
Was that question for Natalie?
Oh, yeah, that was for you, Kelly. So just basically the next frontier to some in the data-driven world that we're in is frequency and fidelity, right? Focusing on both of those. And we've talked about both of those a bit. I'd like to hear a bit more from you of what that means to you and where you see that going in the future with respect to data. So Kelly has been having some technical issues because she is in a snowstorm. So that may be what's happening. She may not be able to hear me. So let's go to Will. Will, can you answer that one?
So I think my internet is lagging. Are you waiting on me?
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Apologies to everyone. I'm dealing with a snowstorm, so so bear with me. On the fidelity and frequency question, and, I think that we've got these data sources coming in. We've got a lot of information. We're finding ways to collect similar data streams using different technologies. And so now it's all about, as Stephen and Will both pointed out, getting value. If there's differences, understanding why, getting down to the bottom of what those differences are, and then creating kind of meaningful action plans in response to that data. I think that's, as an industry, kind of where we are is we've got all this data coming in. Now, what do we do with it? We've got methane data coming in. How do we respond to it? How do we deploy teams to go out and look for actual leaks? Really just getting down to understanding the data. And so optimizing that fidelity and frequency piece is really important.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Kelly. Will, do you want to chime in on this one as well?
Yeah, I'll just tell kind of an anecdotal story. I was in a sports bar, I don't know, 6-8 weeks ago, and I swear to God, a guy lost his mind. Why? Because his game accidentally was on standard definition TV, right? And it just turns out the bartender selected the wrong channel. And it's because he had become accustomed to seeing all the games in 4K, HDTV, whatever it is that he liked to watch. And what you see as the propensity or the focus on climate change grows, the propensity to pay for higher fidelity data, to want to seek out higher fidelity data, not just by companies, but by financial markets, by regulators, by community stakeholders, will only go up. And so fidelity means that you want to remove as much of the noise as you can make. I think Stephen made some great points about that in terms of his actual point. I think you want frequency because even if there is noise, you can start to see a little bit. You can find signals if you have higher frequency data as well. And so there's a lot of great things here where it's just not collecting a whole bunch of random data, right, to drive at this problem. And I truly believe that the market, the population writ large, as it relates to climate change, is going to focus on better information. And so the defense of saying, man, it costs a lot to figure out my groundwater or net water usage or chemicals disposal, things like that. It's not necessarily going to be as much of a defense as it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I would add another comment that I see a lot of my customers in particular struggling with trying to design the right system for what they're trying to solve for, right? A lot of customers are coming to us and saying, do I need a drone flyover every week, every month, every quarter, once a year? What should I be doing? Do I need real-time monitoring for solving some of these things? Do I do it on some of my asset? Do I do it on the full asset? And there's this kind of history of the business where no one really wants to be first, but no one wants to be last. They don't want to get outpaced by their peer group. But at the end of the day, they're also getting paid on selling production of oil and gas. And so they're trying to find the sweet spot of how do I design and not over design the system for what I'm being asked of, and really, make a fit for purpose for their business and the objections at hand.
Thanks, Kayla. Stephen, anything to add to this one? If not, I have a question that just came in that I'm going to pose to the group.
I do. So the one thing about frequency is that it's that same trade-off I was talking about last time, that you have every study over the last 10 years has shown that if you want to reduce the total emissions, the magic thing to target is the super emitters, that these very small number of emission sources contribute disproportionately to the total. And so the question becomes, how do you shorten the time that super emitters run? Like, you're not going to stop things from breaking. You're not going to stop failures from happening. But when they do happen, how do you shorten that interval that they run for? And so that's this trade-off that I say, like when we do our flights in the airplane, is it quarterly or is it monthly? And the one thing, and I'm sure Will back me up on this one, that the one thing that's nice about the continuous monitoring systems is that you don't really have to think about frequency. So if you're monitoring constantly, you know that you can manage your data. You can say, maybe I'm going to monitor or measure 5 times a second, but then I'm only going to take the highest value over the course of a minute, and that's all I'm going to save. So I can kind of manage this big wealth of data by getting rid of the 300 in that second, and that 5 second that weren't the one I wanted. So I think that you have to balance this trade-off between frequency and cost, as well as just managing this burden of data.
Yeah, it's a great point. So let me pose this question. It's related to this measured data that we're gathering. And the question is, it's from someone at Sempra. So how do you get the EPA and other agencies to incorporate the measured GHG data into compliance reporting? Anyone want to take that one?
I've got to start.
Go for it, Stephen.
So 2 things. So one, we've just had this period where we all submitted comments to the EPA about the new rulemaking, sort of basically in a way educating the EPA about new technologies that are available and how they can be used. So that's one technique. The other one, we just completed this 6-month study, Project Falcon, with a bunch of operators. And what we did is we had each of the operators over-instrumented one of their sites. Like, they would put 12 sensors on the site that should have 3 or 4. And what we did is we collected all this data for 6 months to say, what can you really expect out of these fixed monitoring systems? Not specifically just ours, but just in general, what can you get with a sensor sitting at one place on a site or 4 places? And then what we did with that, the EPA actually participated in some of the calls we had about this. And the end result is that we are now submitting a peer-reviewed publication, something that the EPA can reference when they're describing this to their stakeholders. So that's a big way, I think, that we can work with the EPA, sort of educating them on not just the technology, but also, what does the emission spectrum look like? What do we really expect, and what can we gain from each of these different processes?
Will, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think Steve made a great point earlier when he's talking about, like, super emitters. Is it quarterly? Is it monthly? And he's saying, hey, what if it's seconds, right? Seconds to. And I thought that was a great point, because when you're talking to some of the regulators, sometimes it all comes down to, like, well, what about this? In a tornado or 100-mile-an-hour winds, you won't be able to see that. And I'm like, yes, but what is the alternative, right? It's that would have not been spotted for 6 months, just openly flowing into the atmosphere. And I think reframing it, I know that's outside the regulatory bounds, and they have to do their job to ask every difficult question. But when Stephen was saying that, the light bulb kind of comes on, and you see how powerful that could be to know that you have a super emitting event in a matter of minutes versus the next time someone flies over a plane a month, 3 months later. And so everyone should always just frame it into, cool, what is the status quo, right? And I think it helps bring back the point of, if you're in charge of protecting the environment, speed to detection, right, is super important. And there's lots of other areas that we use this same approach as well.
Kayla, anything to add on that one? Got another question too, so I'll jump to that once you're done.
Yeah, I mean, I think with most regulatory aspects, companies and the institutional climate are always going to have a faster pace of adoption and recognition and almost self-governance than what will get baked into some of the regulation. It doesn't mean it can't guide it and be a little bit more realistic than we have previously. But definitely I've seen a lot of momentum just from the investment community pressuring the C-suite of a lot of these operators, and a lot of the C-suite taking a look around and saying, yes, we do want to do something about this and we should be more transparent. And we all are participating together to try to solve it in a realistic way.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kayla. So what do you think? I'm going to pose this one to you, Kayla, just because you were talking about, you mentioned regulators. So what do you think is the role of regulators in terms of data collection and provision? Companies already have to provide a lot of the data to regulators. So what is the role of regulators in all of this?
I mean, I see the role a little differently. I mean, probably just because of my own industry perspective of, yes, regulation is necessary, but again, it's always a laggard to what's going on in the investment and the institutional investment community. That will drive more action, whereas the regulation can come in and play the role of benchmarking, making sure things are done in a standard way, making sure they're done in a transparent way. So not, reporting the bright and shiny things that you're doing and all of the good that you're doing, but also like what's happening across all of the assets, across the entire company's strategy, and really, helping to get a level benchmark. I think that's what most people struggle with right now with the kind of lack of up-to-date regulation around this is, what should we be doing? We want a benchmark that we can reference across the industry. It's not a one-size-fits-all perspective. So I definitely think that's where that can come in to help.
Yeah, thanks, Kayla. Stephen, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah. How did you know?
I just knew. I could tell.
It's funny. The one thing that this might be unpopular, but the one thing that I've seen is that a lot of times you have a majority even of operators that are doing the right thing. And yet those operators get dragged down by the few that aren't. And so to me, part of the role of the regulator is to separate them by actually watching, by measuring. Like I was noticing that 5 years ago when we were on a site, even though we were hired by the operator, we were kind of looked at as the enemy. And that has changed, and changed drastically, because now I think people are used to the fact that regulators are scheduling flights, that they're finding out when you have a site that's leaking. And so now when we're at a site, we're looked at as helping to keep them out of trouble, basically. And so I kind of appreciate the fact that by the regulator staying on top of what's going on and demanding the transparency, that what we're doing is we're leveling the playing field. Like if you're not doing your part, you all of a sudden have a spotlight on you. And I think that is the only way to make it fair for those that are.
Kelly, you want to chime in?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So I think Kayla and Stephen both made really excellent points that I think, regulation does lag. And I think that the innovation is really being driven by market conditions. But it's really not everybody in our industry that's coming along with that. And so regulation is really important to level that playing field. And I think that's where, we need regulation that doesn't prevent the innovation in the front end, but then brings everybody up to the same point.
Great point. Will, you're up.
Yeah, Stephen made some really good points again, but I always say to people, regulation is the floor, right? That is the floor. Meaning it sets the floor. And I think some people view the floor sometimes as like the only place where they need to go. And as capital markets continue to scrutinize certain types of investment classes, not just energy, the floor is not going to be sufficient for lots of different forms of operation. So I think that's one important point to hit on here. And to the other point that Stephen made is like, yes, there's some operators who are being drugged down. Guys, we saw this firsthand in the last administration, the methane rules. you had companies coming out saying, I'm not in favor of rolling back those methane rules. And so I think that was a great example of the point that Stephen was outlining, where people were openly raising their hand and saying, no, don't do this, because it's actually dragging us as an industry down. So it was very salient.
Good, great point. Let's see here. I have another question related to industry benchmarks. So this is from Jennifer Petrie Partners. Thanks for joining, Jen. Are there industry benchmarks regarding the level of investment with respect to private versus public companies should be making on their DT, such as percent of revenue or spend? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I got nothing.
I'll jump in real quick. Yes, there is a lot of information available. There are a lot of companies that will go through the 10Ks, the SEC reporting of a lot of these publicly traded companies. Sometimes you will get a private company that's willing to disclose financial information and spend as well. But again, it's very difficult to get an apples to apples comparison because none of the assets are the same. None of the footprints are the same. Even the hydrocarbons that are being produced are not the same. And so it's very difficult to get a standard comparison of, here's the asset, here's the amount of revenue, here's the amount of spend contributed to some of these initiatives. I hope that we get there someday where it's a lot more transparent and standard. But for now, it's very messy and difficult to deal with.
Thanks, Kayla. Anyone else have anything to add on that one? All right.
I would just say it just depends on what the goal is. I mean, I've talked to plenty of companies that are private in nature who say, listen, I get it. All this stuff is coming. My goal is to piggyback on consolidation. And so I'm only going to be in this investment for 2 to 3 years. This is a lower priority. There's other folks who are like, no, we want to be an energy company for the long term. And they're really leaning in. And so I think engineering to the benchmark, even though it's important, obviously, for you an investment, you got to cut it a different way on kind of what is your investment horizon. And that's where I just anecdotally see a lot of differentiation across the space.
Great. Thanks, Will. So let's talk some, let's ask this next question. I love the participation from the audience, so I want to make sure we're answering their questions. So the next question is, what will trigger greater participation by the oil and gas production companies? Let's see, maybe Kayla, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. I'll take the hard ones first. I honestly see a lot of participation by the oil and gas production companies. I think what has been interesting to me is the idea that, a lot of these companies are trying to diversify. They're trying to differentiate their business. They're shifting their strategic plans long term. And I think what a lot of people are really watching for is not just the participation by the community, but what's going to happen with the assets and the asset ownership as it goes along with that. So if you have a major operator who has the capital budget and the skills and the expertise and the workforce to really make an impact on some of these emissions issues, it's not in the best interest of the public or the climate for them to sell off, poor producing assets or things like that to smaller entities who may not have the budget to do what's necessary to operate those assets in a lower emissions type of climate. And I think that it's not necessarily the participation like we've been talking about. It's more the standards, it's the floor, it's, the 50% benchmark, it's here's the top 90%, and where do you fit within the quintile of companies and their participation in some of these initiatives. It's not an either or.
Good point. Let's see. Anyone else want to weigh in on that one before we move on?
I will.
Okay, go for it, Stephen. Thank you.
So, it's not the happiest answer, but I think one thing that's going to trigger participation is catastrophic failures. So when you have events, leaks, big problems, spills that make the news, that tends to get interest. So that sort of a lot of these companies, are trying to keep their public image good. And so one thing you can do, well, two things. One is by participating in some of these programs, you'll eliminate some of those events. And by joining these programs, even after you've had some, you can sort of undo some of the damage that's been done to a reputation. So I feel like the things that are going to help are just going to be those sort of negative events when something goes wrong.
Yeah, that makes sense. Will, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's going to look a lot like the normal S curve of adoption, if you've ever seen that. And a lot of what drives that is fear of missing out. So look at the automotive car industry, I should say. When you roll back the clock just 2-3 years ago, people were kind of like laughing about EVs and like there's never going to be an EV truck. Like I'm a man beating their chest. I was watching halftime a few weeks ago, and there was 3 back-to-back commercials of EV trucks, right? And people rolling them out and everything. Who knows what the adoption will be? But I think you start to see companies are like, oh, shoot, we don't want to miss out on what may be potential wave. So what does that look like in this case? I think when you start to have operators that are able to access benefits that other operators cannot, that would be differentiated commodity markets. That would be easier access to capital. That would be a wider investor base, right? I think that's when you'll start to see people like, geez, I just got to get on this train. And very quickly, you'll start to see adoption pick up quickly.
Great point. All right. Anyone else? Let's talk. I know we've already talked about this. This is like the whole touches on every question really, but business optimization, right? So a lot of folks are thinking about technology, digital technology in terms of business optimization. Love to hear from each of you. How are you thinking about it in other applications externally? Will, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, I think business optimization, Kelly was doing some great points. I know they're crushing a lot of stuff over there at Pure West and really leaning into the environmental stuff. I think it goes even beyond that though. Sometimes business optimization looks at more near-term focus in ROI. And when you look at risk mitigation, what you're trying to do is remove the far ends of the distribution, really just one end of that distribution, that tail. In order to do so, I always say, well, why do you have different forms of insurance? Even though actuarial tables say this is almost likely never going to happen, but it could, right? And it's to remove risk. And so in addition to optimization, I think that there are more benefits here that kind of get lost in the noise when you're trying to justify ROI on how you invest in something. So I say that because some people view some of this stuff in digitization as a cost. It's an investment, right? It enables you to access a lot of other benefits that you don't necessarily see as easy as like, oh, this is going to save me a little bit of time. That said, there's tons of stuff in optimization on lowering labor costs, increasing productivity of every single field tech. If they know where to go when there's a leak, bringing lots of information together, like making things more actionable, all the great points that Stephen was making earlier. So there's tons of optimization fruit, low-hanging fruit there. I would just say don't only focus on that because you're going to miss a large portion of the pie.
Yep, good advice. Kayla, you want to go next on this one?
Yeah, I would just add on to that in terms of I have seen technology be one of the biggest catalysts for connecting the strategic decision making. So what is the 2 to 5 year plan and the operational execution of what's actually happening out in these facilities, in these remote places with the different workforce and the individual contributors. Sometimes, and I think across all businesses, it's not just an energy industry problem. It is the decisions that are being made at the top and the strategic direction and focus and the incremental change of how you get there over time. But these things are happening 24 hours a day. The business doesn't stop. And you have a lot of, dispersed workforce, dispersed skill sets. And so really connecting those and getting everyone operating from the same playbook is huge from a digitization perspective.
Yeah. Kelly, I know you've already kind of touched on some of this as well, but anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I think that in our industry, there's been years that we were kicking and screaming over doing some of these, environmental initiatives. And what we find is as we collect the data, we're able to better define that ROI. We're better able to identify the real benefits of some of these initiatives. And I think that's one of the side effects of the digitization movement.
Stephen, you want to add to this one?
The only thing I would add is, in terms of this optimization, like when we started down this path of the continuous sensing, our initial objective was to make a system that was so inexpensive that nobody could say we can't afford to do what we need to do. We wanted to make it, I guess, very cost effective. And to do that, what we had to do was automate every aspect of it. And so in our goal of optimization, what that meant was we had to make software that could take these mounds of data and give us the one thing that we wanted. Hey, it's time to go to this site with a camera, like the one thing we're after. And so I think that is a big part of this digitalization, that I collect these mounds of data, but I don't want to use people to sift through it. I want to make sure that all that is done through automated mechanisms. Servers are cheap compared to people. So I think that has been sort of our driving focus since we started down this path.
It's a great point. Let's shift just a bit and let's talk about challenges. So, in your experience, what challenges are organizations still facing in this digitization or digitalization journey, and how are leading companies overcoming those challenges? And you can talk about what your companies are doing or what you're just seeing in the market. Let's start with Kayla. Do you want to start on this one?
Sure. Yeah, I see this a lot, have my entire career. So you typically start with a problem that you want to solve, and it's a very finite list of things that you need to solve. And as you go about laying out the plan and the process and who's going to be involved and what should be done, it just takes on this life of its own. It's a total snowball effect to where you can be discussing something that you could probably get information, get results, have some action around within 3 months, and it turns into this 18-month-long project with a project manager. And now you've got this person that you're hiring to come into the country or come into the company and run the initiative. And a lot of it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to re-engineer your entire way of doing business. There's a lot of things that you can just action, incorporate it into your general business model day after day after day. And I see a lot of the Achilles heel of most technology projects is either one, they weren't done with a realistic problem and timeline and what a good solution looks like. So it just kind of lives in the ether and no one ever knows what the end result is. And two, you take on too much all at one time. This is a very incremental type of process that you can use to leverage technology, and it doesn't have to go from redesigning your entire business organization and structure and process.
Yeah. Stephen, want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah. So one challenge that at least a lot of our customers are facing, and I don't have a good answer for it, but example would be cities do this right now. They're required by the EPA to monitor ozone. If they add an extra ozone sensor, more than they're required to put in, and that ozone sensor then hits an alert level, all of a sudden that city is now paying a penalty for something they weren't required to do. Similarly, the oil and gas customers, as they collect this data, one of the concerns they always have is somebody going to come demand this data now that we weren't required to collect to start with, but now that it exists, can someone ask for it? And one of the things that we did that felt a little silly, but in a way it's the regulatory issue that you shouldn't be penalized for doing the right thing. Like what we did, we saw this potential that in the future, people are going to be required to measure VOCs, total VOCs, in addition to looking at methane. So what we did is we put that in every sensor we sell now, but we have it disabled so that the minute if someone or some regulator says you're now required to measure VOCs, we can turn it on. But until then, it doesn't create this potential for harm because this data now exists. And that's hopefully something that we can find a way regulatory, from the regulatory perspective around that we shouldn't ever be in this position where a company who's doing the right thing is now going to be penalized for something they weren't required to do. But until then, I think that's the best we can do to help.
Yeah. It's an interesting point. Will, go ahead and chime in.
Yeah, I thought it was a great point. I would say if you're a long-term investor, the biggest risk that you have right now is doing nothing, right? I was at a closed door breakfast with just 8 operators, not this Tuesday, last Tuesday. And one of the guys there was like, I just want to know what I need to do. And it's like, great. Like every investor ever says, I just need to know where I need to put my money to get a guaranteed return. Especially when you're approaching more volatility, people use the word energy transition all the time. Things become more fragmented. You need to choose a path and go. That doesn't mean you need to have every subcomponent specced out, right? But are you in pursuit of higher fidelity data, lower emissions, more environmental integrity? Go. If you're looking for dividend yields and like returning cash flow to investors and you're a shorter cycle, that's a different choice as well. Go. I just see inaction is the biggest risk here. And sometimes I think people are looking for a consolidated answer, no duh answer. And I do not think that's ever going to appear on the horizon, or at least anytime soon. And leading companies are always out there in any industry doing things that people don't think that they want or don't think that they need at that point in time. Many of the things that we now accept as normal, right? I remember when Netflix first did streaming, no one wanted it, right? You just get your movies. But now all of a sudden we view that as normal. And so get ahead of this, and digitization is really the key. That would be my takeaway.
Great point. Kelly, anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has made some really good points, but finding that fine line between, as an industry rep, between transparency and, as Stephen pointed out, collecting data that might come back to bite us. I mean, that's the big challenge that we're trying to navigate. I mean, we can't stick our head in the sand and pretend this data doesn't exist or not collect it because we're afraid of what it's going to say. But it's figuring out, what is it telling us? If it's a problem, we need to figure out, our industry needs to figure out how to address it, and then be transparent about here's the problems that we're facing and here's the solutions that we're working to implement.
Yeah, great point. We've got a couple of questions here. So first question, what are your thoughts about certification of ESG? Who wants to jump in on that one?
I'm happy to take that.
Go for it, Kelly.
I think our industry has not done a really good job of building trust in this country for oil and gas for many, many years. And I think responsibly certified gas is one step that we're going to need to take. I think that it's something that it's starting to take off across our industry. But having that third party kind of audit, that verification that, yes, we are doing the right things for the right reason, that independent look, I think is becoming really, really important. And I think there's going to be a market for that differentiated gas. It's already starting to grow, but really it's more about building trust, voice of the customer with the investment community. We really just need that third party check.
Great perspective. Anyone else on that one?
Yeah, I might take a controversial stance on it just because we're involved in a lot of the certification process. And yes, I wholeheartedly believe in it. It's definitely part of the voluntary markets. Like I was mentioning first, the investment and the institutional investment community will always be ahead of what gets regulated in. But we see this as just getting baked into the general operations for a business going forward. It's similar to, we use the analogy of sulfur, like it was handled in the 1990s. It's an externality, methane, CO2 emissions. These are all externalities that are now getting priced into the market. But if you look across the industry, there's not a single company that has a head of sulfur management or things that are being certified for sulfur. It's just something that's managed day to day, 24 hours a day as part of the general business operations. And so what you see in a lot of the certificates market is, yes, I wholeheartedly agree with Kelly. Take advantage when you're producing lower emissions natural gas than anyone else in the country. Take advantage of it, and also provide the transparency, which is critical in being good stewards of the industry going forward. But this is probably something that's going to get baked into the general operations over time.
Yeah, I was just going to give Kelly huge props for saying what she said, in that she said, hey, the industry hasn't done a great job of managing its public perception and things like that. And I think that's really the key here. This isn't like some people talk about war and you got to fight back and all this other stuff. Man, if there's any way to erode public credibility, it's that. And so why not lean in like Kelly, Pure West, how they're doing it, and kind of try to, one, differentiate yourself, two, access something while it exists. Kayla's point is very well taken. There may be a world in the not too distant future where this is just standard, right? And so I think that type of mindset is exactly what is needed in more places. So kudos to Kelly.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Kelly and Kayla. Stephen, anything on this one? We have another.
No, you said it all.
Okay. Yeah, so we have a question on international implications. So do you see any viable cross-border benefits in cooperation with Mexico and or Canada? International implications generally. Good question.
Cross-border adjustments are coming, right? And so it will come home to roost, given that incremental demand growth for natural gas for at least United States producers will largely come from overseas market. As you start to see them be forced down, it will be in the company's incentive at that point to really lean into lowering whatever their environmental footprint is, whether that's methane, CO2e, whatever other externalities exist. This is oh so important because sometimes people will tell me there's no way US will ever do a price on carbon. But guess what? The EU will. South Korea will. Singapore will. In which case, there's going to be a carbon tag on a lot of things based on high fidelity data, and it will come home to roost. So if you want to be competitive and get ahead of this curve, there was just a memo on January 21st in the EU where they're trying to accelerate this time frame, and they're trying to move it even further upstream and expand the product slates that they're going after beyond just steel, aluminum, and cement. And so with that, this is kind of what I keep meaning about start, get ahead of the curve, long-term investment, right? Is that I think this could be a huge point of differentiation and really unlock a lot of stuff for producers, allowing them to grow further while other ones are forced to scale back, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Kayla, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I was almost going to use this as the answer to the original question around what will trigger greater participation from the oil and gas companies, because you're already seeing U.S. cargoes being turned away because it's dirtier Permian production. And yeah, we're actively working with a lot of our customers on forecasting and trying to get ahead of what is the carbon tax going to look like for my business 2-5 years from now based on our assets today. Also forecasting what should our asset mix be going forward in order to make sure that we're not paying more tax penalties than we are selling the production volumes that we have. So yeah, that's one of the great things about the oil and gas industry in general, is that it's so tied into the global economy and geopolitical and risk. And you kind of see all of these facets coming together with one industry, with the day-to-day operations and decisions that we're making as an industry.
Right. Anyone else want to chime in on this one before we move on to just one last question?
I have a quick thought. So I don't know about the Mexico, Canada specifically, but I think globally, like the United Nations is pushing the oil and gas methane partnership, OGMP 2.0. And I suspect over time, we're going to see more and more companies signing on for that. And what that's going to mean is that it's going to drive this sort of international standard for energy production. So I think that kind of cross-border cooperation is going to be fabulous, that we're all working to the same standard.
Yeah.
Well, and I would add one last point to that, is that it's so interesting to watch what the US companies are doing right now, because the US is always leading in technology and innovation and willingness. We're just a more agile industry in general compared to some of the international players. And it's almost like a hybrid PR campaign that we have to start now, because a lot of the assets and the production that we have is actually very clean compared to some of the optionality internationally.
Yeah, I just have to highlight that point, right? Competitiveness in the global sphere, right? A lot of people just got to compete on cost, cost, cost. But now there's a new tool in the U.S. producers' bag that they can compete on emissions, on environmental footprint, on tons of other stuff. And so you really want to like push out Nord Stream 2, right? Start highlighting with huge transparency on what the true methane intensity is, or the CO2 intensity is of the gas that's coming from America, right? And I think that people will soon discover this as a tool for growth. So anyways.
Oh, it's a great point and great discussion on that. So we only have a few minutes, but I really wanted to talk about collaboration. And so I think now's as good a time as any to just touch on it. And if everybody just wants to give a minute or two on it, how can stakeholders collaborate to solve the dual challenge of reducing emissions while meeting the growing global energy demand? It's a tough question, obviously, but if anybody wants to chime in on this one, I think it's just so interesting and important to talk about collaboration among our stakeholders.
I've got one on that.
Go for it.
So this is where these Project Astra that was done by University of Texas and Project Falcon that was done by us, we got together and all these different operators agreed to share this research data using their sites and their funds for the greater good. Like the results of Project Falcon will be published for everyone to see. They'll apply to sensors, not just ours. It will be simply scientific knowledge that came because these operators all got together and agreed to share their information and to invest the time and money into doing it. So I think that is a great thing for advancing this cause.
Thanks, Stephen. Great point. Kelly?
Sure. The punchline for me is do what you can. I mean, there's so much R&D happening on the information gathering space that it really would be impossible for one company or one individual to know everything that's going on. And so, you start thinking about some of these organized collaborations, and frankly, they're coming out of the woodwork, for industry to make some decisions about, where can I add value? Where can I get value? I think we do what we can. I think, Pure West, we're piloting a number of technologies. We're sharing that information. We're participating in groups like the Environmental Partnership. And frankly, they take a lot of time. You can't do everything. And so again, the punchline is really, you do what you can, share what you can. I think that our industry is becoming much more transparent with each other. We don't look at each other as just strictly the competition anymore. We look at each other as collaborators. And so that's really helpful.
Very helpful. Kayla, Will, any final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, and this is typically how we guide our software development teams as well. So it's definitely bringing all of the brightest minds together. You're looking at mechanical engineering, physics, data science, financial. All of these problems are interconnected at the end of the day. And what we often tell our developers is a lack of decision or indecision is worse than a bad decision. A bad decision you learn from, you can quickly pivot, you can correct it. But sitting around and not making a decision is way more harmful than a bad decision at this point. And so, it's really interesting to see everyone coming together. There is this renewed spirit of industry together and, championing our voice in the global economy. And so I feel very, personally privileged to be a part of a lot of these initiatives.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kayla. Will?
I just love that Kayla said that, because that was the point I was making earlier on a macro level. And so she does it on a micro level as always. So thank you for highlighting that. Listen, I think that there's so much low hanging fruit here for collaboration. I know we're working with Validere and Expansive on something. And I just think there's tons of ways that operators can collaborate with other types of operators or service providers or whatever. So I always encourage people to focus on the larger goal rather than just their slice, grow the pie rather than try to expand your slice. So that's the only thing I would say. And I just want to reiterate the point, doing nothing actually is doing something. It's a choice that you make. and it's arguably one of the worst choices that you can make.
Great. Okay, well, this was a fascinating discussion. Thank you all for the time. We didn't even get to all the questions that we had. So, kudos to the participants and the attendees for getting involved and asking all the great questions. So thank you all. And I will turn it over to Bina to close us out.
Thanks so much, Natalie. I love ending on the topic of collaboration because that's obviously what Energy Dialogues likes to do, collaboration, content, connecting. So thank you very much to our panelists. Talking about digitalization and technology, of course, the reason we could do this virtual event today is because of all of that. So advancement in this field, both in energy and of course, and beyond is super helpful for us. We give a big thank you to Validere and Project Canary for sponsoring, the speakers for enlightening us, and of course you as the audience for participating and the engagement in engaging and participating in today's dialogue. I encourage everyone to check out our speakers' web pages and find out more about what they do, as well as Energy Dialogues' upcoming events, and specifically our Energy Dialogues Collaborative, and become a member. These events are included in your membership and more. And of course, this is just one of the touch points throughout the year that we like to have with our network and dive into different topics that are relevant to everyone today. This dialogue will be on there as a recording for any of you that need to or want to revisit some of these things, as well as, of course, our past interviews, webinars, podcasts, and other opportunities to engage with members of our network who are just waiting to collaborate. So without further ado, until next time, I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Bye.